The wind on the Hungarian plain has a way of making silence feel loud. It's early April in the year 1241, and King Béla IV stands awake while his camp sleeps in fragments, some men resting, others arguing, others praying as if prayer could thicken the night into a wall. Out on the heath near Mohi, the ground looks harmless. Low grass, soft rises, the dark ribbon of the Sayo River, and beyond it, the line of trees that hides more than it shows. To Béla, that river is more than water. It's a question. Can it protect a kingdom for one more day? Or will it become the edge of a trap? Inside his command tent, candlelight trembles across a worn map. Béla traces the rivers with a finger, the Sayo, the Tisa, trying to see the battlefield before it happens. Modern leaders would call it planning. In truth, it's something older and more human. A man trying to negotiate with uncertainty. Because Béla knows this war isn't only outside Hungary, it is also inside it. For years, he has tried to restore royal authority, to pull power back from magnates who behave like kings in their own lands. That struggle has left bruises. Now, as the Mongols approach, those bruises become fractures. Not every lord in the camp looks at Béla and sees a single commander. Some see a rival, some see a debt, some see an opportunity. And then there is the wound that still hasn't closed, the Cumans. Not long ago, a Cuman leader named Kotani asked Béla for refuge, permission for his people to settle in the kingdom. Béla said yes, partly out of compassion, but also out of strategy. Cuman riders understood steppe warfare. They could have been the flexible cavalry Hungary desperately needed. But politics is rarely grateful. Fear spreads faster than reason. The Cumans are treated as outsiders. Tension turns into chaos. Kotani is killed, and the Cumans ride away, not as allies, but as a warning that Hungary cannot even hold its own promises together. Now Béla sits in the dark, with the knowledge that the enemy to the east has already noticed all of this. The Mongols do not need spies in every tent to sense weakness. Weakness has a sound. It's the sound of arguments that never end. It's the sound of delayed decisions. It's the sound of people preparing to save themselves first. Béla steps outside. In the camp lanes, torches burn low. Horses shift and stamp. Metal rings and leather straps whisper whenever a man turns in his sleep. Beyond the wagons, the plain stretches out, calm as a lake before a storm. He walks along the defensive ring, wagons chained together, ropes pulled tight, an old tactic against nomadic cavalry. The logic is simple. If the horsemen cannot sweep around you, they cannot break you. But Béla has heard the stories. He knows this enemy carries siege engineers and engines that can turn wood and earth into splinters. He knows they think differently. And he knows that under the Mongols, nomadic doesn't mean simple. A young guard stands near the riverbank, spear upright, breath visible in the cold. Béla pauses beside him, and for a moment, the distance between king and soldier disappears. "Are you afraid?" Béla asks quietly. The soldier hesitates, then answers in a voice that carries more honesty than heroism. "I am, but I'm here." Béla nods. That is what he needs most tonight. Not speeches, not grand vows. Just that simple choice. To stay. He looks toward the black line of trees across the Sayo. The scouts reported nothing ahead. No movement, no fires, no Mongol silhouettes. But Béla's stomach tightens at those words. Nothing ahead, because nothing can be a mask. Nothing can be an ambush waiting in perfect silence. If the forest is empty, why does it feel like it's watching? Somewhere in the wind, Béla imagines the turul, the legendary bird of Hungarian memory, the symbol that once guided the Magyar people to this land. In old stories, it appears when destiny shifts. Tonight, Béla doesn't know whether it would come as comfort or as a warning. Far away, beyond the river and beyond the trees, another man is also awake. Subutai. To Subutai, war is not a sudden clash. It is a clock you build. It is a pattern you teach your enemy to follow until they cannot stop following it. He does not need to feel anger or hatred to be dangerous. He needs only to understand how people react when they believe they are safe. He has already studied Hungary, not just the roads and rivers, but the politics, the timing, the season. He knows the Europeans expect campaigns in summer. He prefers winter and early spring when rivers freeze, marshes harden, and slow armies become slower. He knows how quickly Mongol messengers move, how easily separated columns can act like a single hand closing into a fist. Most of all, he knows where Béla has chosen to camp. Mohi is not just a name, it's a shape. River on one side, marsh on another, hills and woods behind. A place where a large army feels protected and becomes boxed in. Subutai rides the ground in his mind like a map with no ink. Batu will press from the front at the stone bridge. Subutai will come from another direction, quietly, patiently, turning the river from a shield into a hinge. That night, while Hungarian fires burn in the open, Mongol hands work in the dark, building what Béla's scouts do not see. And in that space between what is seen and what is hidden, the battle is already beginning. On the surface, it is a quiet night on a European plain. But beneath it, two minds are moving toward each other, one trying to hold a kingdom together, the other preparing to break it apart with timing, terrain, and precision. By dawn, the Sayo will no longer sound like water. It will sound like history changing. If there's one mistake people often make when they picture the Mongol Empire, it's imagining a wild storm of riders that simply crashes forward and overwhelms everything in its path. In reality, the Mongols in the 13th century were closer to a disciplined system, fast, coordinated, and terrifyingly practical. Less like a random storm, and more like a storm that knows exactly where it's going. And the man who understood that better than almost anyone was Subutai. Subutai wasn't a prince, and he didn't need royal blood to command respect. He earned his place through results. To him, war wasn't a matter of courage alone. It was a matter of timing, distance, terrain, and, most importantly, human behavior. He treated campaigns the way a modern strategist might treat logistics and communication, as the hidden engines that decide what happens long before the first clash. By the time Hungary enters the Mongol sights, Europe has already heard the name Mongol like a curse carried on the wind. In the east, the Mongols had torn through the Rus principalities. Towns that believed themselves protected by tradition and walls learned a brutal lesson. Walls don't matter if your enemy controls the pace of the war. Whole regions were thrown into panic simply because the Mongols seemed to appear where nobody expected them and move faster than anyone thought possible. What made them so fast wasn't magic, it was organization. Their messengers rode with a discipline Europe rarely matched at the time. Relays, fresh mounts, rapid updates. That meant commanders could coordinate across long distances with an efficiency that felt unbelievable to their enemies. It wasn't just cavalry speed, it was information speed. In a sense, Subutai had something like a medieval version of a modern communications network, and he knew how to weaponize it. He also chose his seasons wisely. European armies preferred campaigning in warmer months, when roads were easier and supply was more predictable. The Mongols often preferred winter or early spring. It sounds counterintuitive, but it offered advantages. Rivers and marshes could freeze, turning obstacles into roads. Cold weather that slowed or weakened settled armies barely slowed steppe horsemen who lived their lives outdoors. Subutai didn't see winter as a problem. He saw winter as a tool. So when the Mongols prepared for their push into Central Europe, the plan wasn't simply ride west. It was built like a two-part mechanism. One part of the Mongol force moved into Poland, another drove into Hungary. The idea was to stretch Europe's ability to respond, divide attention, split potential reinforcements, and make every ruler feel isolated. It's a logic that still makes sense today. If you can force your opponent to react in multiple directions at once, they will almost always respond too slowly somewhere. In early April of 1241, that northern thrust produced a major shock, the Battle of Legnica in Poland. The Polish and Moravian forces were defeated. News of that defeat didn't just remove a potential shield on the Mongols' flank, it also sent a message to every court in the region. Help may not be coming. For Hungary's King Béla, that news would have landed like a stone in the chest. If Poland could fall, if a European host could be broken there, then Hungary was no longer staring at a border raid, it was staring at the arrival of a new kind of war. And that's where Subutai's deeper strength appears. He didn't just fight armies, he fought assumptions. European leaders often thought in terms of a single decisive clash. Gather your lords, form your line, win the day. Subutai understood that if he could shape the conditions of the clash, where it happened, when it happened, and what the enemy believed was happening, then victory became far more likely. There's also something else that traveled with the Mongols besides speed and skill: belief. Many Mongol warriors saw themselves moving beneath the favor of the eternal blue sky, Tengri. Subutai wasn't a mystic, but he understood how faith hardens resolve. When soldiers believe destiny is on their side, they hesitate less, they endure more. And in war, hesitation can be fatal. So Subutai used every advantage at once: disciplined movement, rapid coordination, and psychological pressure. He harassed, withdrew, and let his opponent believe he was choosing the tempo. He encouraged the kind of confidence that makes a commander chase, because once the chase begins, the chaser is already reacting, already late, already stepping into a rhythm the enemy controls. That rhythm was tightening around Béla. By the time the armies finally face each other near Mohi, the most dangerous part of the Mongol attack may already be complete. Because the real battle, in Subutai's mind, begins long before the first arrow is loosed. Béla IV didn't step onto the Mohi plain as a naive king chasing glory. He arrived there carrying the weight of a country that was already struggling to agree on what it was, even before the Mongols came. Hungary was not poor, and it was not small, but it was fragmented. Powerful magnates guarded their privileges like private kingdoms, and Béla had spent years trying to pull authority back toward the crown. That effort mattered in the long run, but in the short run, it left scars. When crisis arrived, those scars opened. In a modern sense, Béla was facing what we'd call a coordination problem. He didn't just need soldiers, he needed everyone to move on the same clock, to trust the same plan, to accept a single command. And that was precisely what Hungary struggled to do. The timing could not have been worse. Only 2 years earlier, in 1239, the Cumans had come seeking refuge. Béla's decision to accept them made strategic sense. Cuman cavalry understood steppe warfare. If anyone could help Hungary meet nomad horsemen on their own terms, it was the Cumans. But many Hungarian nobles feared them, distrusted them, and treated them like an infection rather than an ally. Then the crisis inside the crisis. Kotny, the Cuman leader, was killed during unrest and pest. The Cumans fled. What should have been a reinforcement became a warning sign, and it echoed across the kingdom. Béla didn't just lose potential allies, he lost confidence, public confidence, and perhaps even his own belief that the realm would hold steady under pressure. And now the Mongols were coming, not as a raid, but as a campaign. Béla wasn't alone, though. Some men stood with him, and their loyalty mattered, because loyalty was becoming a rare resource. His brother, Duke Koloman, Galman, brought Croatian and Slavonian strength, and just as importantly, a steady presence inside the royal camp. The warrior Archbishop Ugrin Chak was there too, a churchman who believed the defense of the realm was not separate from faith, but part of it. Béla also had a small force of disciplined religious knights, Templars in many retellings, whose training and cohesion could stabilize a battlefield that otherwise risked dissolving into separate noble bands. In Béla's camp, you could feel the difference between people who came because they believed in the kingdom and people who came because they feared what would happen if the kingdom fell. Those are not the same motivations, and in war, they produce very different behavior. As the army approached Mohi, Béla made a choice that was both practical and revealing. He built a defensive camp using wagons chained together into a ring. It was a known tactic in Europe against steppe cavalry. A wagon fort could blunt mobility. It could protect the center. It could force an enemy to attack where you wanted them to attack. But it also revealed something else. Béla was already thinking like a man who suspected he might be outmaneuvered. He was trying to create certainty inside a landscape where certainty was disappearing. He positioned the camp with the Sayo River nearby, and the stone bridge as the obvious crossing point. And in most wars, that would have been reasonable. Control the bridge, control the approach, let the river do part of the work for you. Yet Béla had heard enough to worry. The Mongols were not a typical nomad force. They traveled with engineers. They carried field siege equipment. They adapted quickly. The kind of defenses that worked against earlier raiders might not work against an enemy that could bring the logic of a siege onto an open plain. From a modern perspective, this is what we'd call a forecasting problem, judging a new opponent through old patterns. Béla sensed the danger of that mistake, but sensing something is not the same as having time to fix it, and time was the one thing Béla couldn't buy. The camp settled into the uneasy rhythm before battle. Men sharpening blades, checking straps, whispering prayers, arguing in low voices that never fully stopped. Béla walked among them, not to inspire with speeches, but to assess. He watched how quickly order spread. He watched how easily rumor spread. He watched which nobles listened and which ones looked away. Then came the scout reports. Nothing ahead. On the surface, it sounded like relief. But Béla understood what nothing could mean. Sometimes nothing isn't safety. Sometimes nothing is concealment. Sometimes nothing is the shape of a plan you haven't seen. That night, as the wind moved over the heath and the river mist thickened, Béla felt that strange tension leaders sometimes describe. A sense that events are already in motion beyond your reach, and you are only catching up to them. He stood by the edge of the camp looking towards the dark line of woods beyond the Sayo and tried to imagine what was waiting there. Not the Mongol faces, not their numbers. Something more important, their timing. Because Béla's real opponent was not an army, it was a method. And somewhere out in that darkness, Subutai was counting the same minutes, calmly, silently, shaping the battlefield into a question Béla might not be able to answer in time. By dawn, Béla would learn whether his wagon ring was a fortress, or whether it was a wall he had built around his own army. Subutai did not come to the Sayo River looking for a dramatic fight. He came looking for conditions, specific, measurable conditions that would make Hungary's choices shrink until there was only one outcome left. In the darkness before Mohi, he rode to a low rise and studied the land the way an engineer studies a structure. Down on the heath, King Béla's camp sat heavy and visible, surrounded by wagons and fires. Around it, the terrain formed quiet walls, the river line ahead, softer ground and marsh to one side, and hills and woods behind. To a tired army, that geography felt like protection. To Subutai, it looked like a room with the doors already marked. From a modern perspective, this is where the battle begins, not with steel, but with decision design. Subutai's genius wasn't only in how he fought, it was in how he forced the other side to fight in the wrong place, at the wrong time, under the wrong assumptions. He understood that Béla would cling to the most obvious feature on the map, the stone bridge over the Sayo. If Hungary could hold that bridge, the camp could breathe. If the bridge fell too early, the whole army would feel exposed. So Subutai and Batu built a plan around that instinct. Batu would strike straight at the stone bridge, loudly and visibly, to pin the Hungarians in place on the heath. That assault wasn't just about crossing the river, it was about fixing Béla's attention, making him commit men, energy, and confidence to a single point. And while Béla watched Batu, Subutai would do something far more dangerous. He would create another crossing. South of the bridge, under cover of night and mist, Subutai led engineers and horsemen to a quieter bend of the river and began building a wooden bridge, fast, rough, practical. No banners, no speeches, just timber, rope, mud, and men working in silence. It's easy to forget how decisive that kind of work is in medieval warfare. We tend to remember the charge, the clash, the heroic last stand. But the truth is, campaigns often turn on labor and logistics. A bridge is not just wood, it is a change in geometry. It creates a second angle of attack, a second clock running at the same time. It's redundancy, the kind of backup plan that modern systems are built around. Subutai was building redundancy into the battlefield. If the stone bridge held, Batu could keep pressure on it until it cracked. If the stone bridge failed to give him a clean breakthrough, Subutai's bridge could still bring an army across somewhere else. Hungary would be forced to react either way, and reacting is always slower than choosing. The most striking part is what didn't happen. Béla's scouts didn't discover any of this. They rode out, crossed the bridge, looked into the woods, and came back with the worst possible report. Nothing. No enemy, no movement, no danger. But Subutai had learned something about European armies. He learned that many of them scouted as if they were looking for a visible army, like a wall of men or a line of fires. The Mongols didn't give you that. They gave you emptiness, and then they filled it all at once. That night, Batu climbed a hill with his commanders and looked down on the Hungarian camp like a hunter studying an animal in a clearing. He could see how boxed in the camp was. He could see how little room Béla had to maneuver. And he repeated the one rule that mattered to him. The Hungarians must be kept right there, on that heath, at all costs. Because if Béla moved, if he slipped away before the trap shut, the campaign would become longer, more difficult, more expensive. Subutai and Batu did not come this far to chase shadows through forests and fortresses. So the plan demanded timing. Batu would press, Subutai would swing behind. The two forces would meet around the Hungarian camp like a closing hand. But timing is also where even great plans can bleed. Building a bridge in darkness, in spring conditions, with damp ground and uncertain water flow, is never perfectly predictable. Wood shifts, rope stretches, mud swallows boots. Progress slows by minutes that feel small, until those minutes stack up into danger. Subutai, for all his calm, would have known the risk. If the bridge took too long, Batu's men would pay for every extra moment they spent trying to pin Hungary at the stone bridge. Batu would take casualties, momentum could stall, and in the pressure of battle, even allies can turn their frustration into blame. Still, Subutai stayed committed. That was part of his character as much as his skill. He didn't panic when a plan met friction. He adjusted, absorbed the delay, and kept the overall structure intact. On the Hungarian side of the river, Béla walked among wagons and chains, believing he was building a fortress. In a sense, he was, but he was also limiting his own options. A wagon ring can protect you, yet it can also slow you down. It can give you structure, yet it can turn into a cage if the enemy controls the outside. By the last hours before dawn, the Sayo River was no longer a simple boundary between two armies. It had become the hinge of Subutai's design. Béla's campfires burned steadily on the heath. His sentries watched the stone bridge. His scouts had seen nothing. and across the river, under the thinning mist, Subutai's bridge was nearly complete. In a few hours, when Batu's assault begins at the obvious crossing, Hungary will rush to meet it, exactly as Subutai expects. And that is the cruel elegance of the trap at Mohi. The enemy doesn't force you into it by strength alone. He leads you into it by making your choices feel reasonable, right up till they aren't.
Dawn on the Sajou does not arrive gently. It comes like a curtain pulled back too fast, fog thinning, light sharpening, and suddenly the world is all edges, spear points, whetstone, nervous horses, and the narrow bridge that now feels like the hinge of the entire kingdom. In the Hungarian camp, the alarm spreads in a wave. Men stumble out from under cloaks, grabbing helmets and shields. Horses snort and stamp. Lanterns swing on wagon chains. And through it all, one message repeats like a drumbeat: the bridge, the bridge, the bridge. King Béla IV is up at once. He doesn't panic, but he moves with the urgency of a man who understands something modern leaders understand too. When information arrives late, decisions become emergencies. He mounts and rides hard toward the river. Mud spits beneath hooves. The wind carries the sound of shouting and metal clatter. Ahead, through the thinning fog, the stone bridge appears, and at its western end, Hungary's defenders are already in place. For a brief moment, it looks promising. The bridge is narrow. The Hungarians have formed a dense wall, shields locked, spears angled, bodies packed close enough that a horse cannot slip between them. On an open plain, Mongol cavalry is lethal because it can spread, circle, and strike where you're weak. On a bridge, there is no space to circle. There is only forward. Béla sees it and feels the first fragile spark of hope. If the bridge holds, the line holds. Then Batu changes the language of the battle. Across the river, behind the Mongol ranks, compact siege engines are dragged into position. They are not the massive machines of a long castle siege. These are field engines, built to move with the army. And that, for the Hungarians, is the shock. They expected arrows and cavalry. They did not expect the sky to start throwing weight. The first shot rises with a harsh creak of rope and wood, then a rushing sound. A stone arcs over the river and slams down near the bridgehead with a violence that feels like the ground itself flinching. Dust and mud burst upward. Men recoil, horses rear, and then fight back down under the pull of reins. And then another shot, and another. Some projectiles burn, bundles soaked in flammable material that arrive trailing smoke and embers. Chroniclers later describe thunder and flashes. Modern historians debate the exact mixtures, but the effect is unmistakable. Smoke blinds, fire terrifies, and even disciplined soldiers begin to step backward without meaning to. This is what siege weapons do on an open field. They don't just break wood, they break certainty. Béla watches his bridge defenders struggle to keep their footing as stones and fire push into their space. It's not just injuries, it's disruption. Every impact opens a gap, every gap invites pressure, and Batu is waiting to turn that pressure into crossing. Under cover of bombardment, Mongol cavalry surges forward. They don't pour across in a wild rush. They come in tight file, controlled and relentless, using the bridge like a funnel that feeds their front line onto the western bank. The Hungarians thrust, brace, and shout. Spears jab in short, disciplined motions. Shields rise and overlap. For moments, the bridge mouth becomes a grinding contest of inches, not miles. But the Mongols keep coming, and the bombardment keeps landing. The defenders can't hold perfect shape while the ground around them is erupting. A line can survive arrows, a line can survive a charge, but a line struggles when the earth itself is being struck. Béla watches his defenders struggle to keep their footing as stones and fire push into their space. It's not just injuries, it's disruption. Every impact opens a gap, every gap invites pressure, and Batu is waiting to turn that pressure into crossing. Now Béla understands something painful. He has not stopped Batu, he has only slowed him. The day is no longer about whether the Mongols can cross, they already have. Now it's about what happens when the enemy you feared for his speed begins to settle into position in front of your entire army, on your side of the river, under the rising sun. Béla steadies his horse and looks across the heath. Smoke drifts, banners snap. The air is filled with dust and the silent logic of an enemy plan unfolding. He raises his hand, signaling readiness, not because he believes the danger has passed, but because the real battle has only just begun. On the Mohi Heath, the battle does something unusual. For a brief stretch of time, it looks like Hungary might actually bend the Mongols backward. After Batu forces the crossing, the fighting spreads out onto the field, but the terrain doesn't give the Mongols the wide open space they love. Marshy ground and river lines restrict movement, and that means their greatest strength, fluid maneuver, doesn't fully come alive. The fight turns tighter, heavier, more brutal in its pressure and footing. And in those conditions, Béla's troops are dangerous. Hungarian knights and infantry push forward in dense ranks, shields locked, lances steady, their momentum built not on speed, but on mass and discipline. Duke Koloman presses in with his men, banners snapping in the wind. Archbishop Ugrin is there too, armored beneath his clerical mantle, moving with the line as if he's part of the very spine of the army. A small group of religious knights holds formation with cold restraint, their wedge advancing step by step. For a moment, the Mongols seem strained, forced to give ground in places, forced to tighten their own formations. Batu's front line holds, but it holds under real pressure. Every step is contested, every movement costs. And this is where modern eyes can see something important. Even the best plan bleeds when it meets friction. While Batu fights to keep the Hungarians pinned, Subutai's hidden move is still on the clock. South of the main crossing, the wooden bridge that should have been ready earlier has taken longer than expected. The river is higher than ideal, the ground is wet, timber shifts, ropes stretch, men work fast, but fast in mud and water is never as fast as it sounds in a plan. Subutai knows exactly what this delay means. If the bridge comes late, Batu absorbs the cost. Casualties, exhaustion, a rising risk that the Hungarians might break through before the second jaw of the trap closes. And Batu feels that cost in real time. On the field, he directs units forward with sharp gestures, urging them to hold, to endure, to keep Hungary right there on the heath. His cavalry releases controlled volleys, trying to maintain distance, trying to prevent a full heavy charge from punching a hole through his line. But the Hungarians keep pushing, close enough that arrows are no longer the only language, close enough that the battle becomes weight against weight. Béla can feel the opportunity, not a grand victory, just a narrow opening, a chance to break Batu's rhythm and force the Mongols to retreat back toward the bridge. In those moments, hope is not a celebration, it is a calculation. One more push, one more coordinated effort, and the field might turn. But then, finally, the bridge in the south is finished. Subutai mounts. He gives a small signal, nothing dramatic, no roar, just a hand lifted and held. His horses step onto the new wooden span carefully. The bridge flexes under real weight. Hooves thud on wet planks, ropes vibrate. Men and horses move with practiced balance, crossing not like raiders, but like a disciplined engine. And then Subutai appears, not in front of the Hungarians, behind them. A horn call rises from the rear, dust shifts, figures emerge through the haze in a wide arc. It's the kind of moment that changes the air on a battlefield, because armies don't panic from being outnumbered, they panic from being surprised in the wrong direction. Béla turns and sees it. The rear threat is real. The trap has closed its second hinge. Subutai doesn't charge immediately. He spreads his cavalry into a broad half-circle, creating pressure and cutting off options. Archers align and release coordinated volleys into the Hungarian rear and flanks, not in wild bursts, but in controlled rhythm, enough to disrupt, enough to force pivots, enough to make every order harder to deliver. The battlefield becomes a problem of orientation. Units begin to turn, horses wheel carefully to avoid collisions, armor makes every pivot heavier. In a modern sense, this is what happens when a system loses its stable direction, when the signal-to-noise ratio collapses. Too many threats, too little time, too many voices. Béla realizes the danger instantly. If he continues pushing Batu, his own army risks being cut in half. If he tries to face Subutai fully, Batu will press into the front. If he stays on open ground, the Mongols will use arrows and movement to tear the army apart. So he chooses the only move that still makes sense. He withdraws toward the wagon lagger. It's not a heroic charge, it's leadership, it's containment. Béla orders his troops into columns and pulls them back in controlled retreat, trying to preserve structure even as arrows fall and dust rises. Shields lift, men step backward in measured pace. Officers wave units toward the openings in the wagon ring. Wagons are shifted, chains pulled tighter, gaps narrowed. Bodies strain against wood and iron, trying to make the lagger a fortress again. Outside, the Mongols tighten their ring. Cavalry forms a wide encirclement at standoff distance. Siege engines are dragged closer. Batu's line stabilizes and then advances. Subutai's rear arc holds position, feeding pressure into the Hungarian camp like air into a fire. This is the moment when even victory has a cost. Batu is furious. The delay at the southern bridge has meant his men endured harsher fighting than planned. In his mind, the whole operation should have closed faster, cleaner. He rides to Subutai's sector, reins snapping as he stops hard, and confronts him. The exchange is tense. Batu's gestures are sharp, impatient. Subutai's posture is calm. He does not argue with emotion. He answers with logic. If we retreat now, Hungary will regroup, the campaign will stretch, and the opportunity created at Mohi will be wasted. Subutai's style of war is like a modern project manager closing a decisive phase. When the opening is there, you finish the job. You don't leave a half-closed trap and hope it works tomorrow. So the siege continues. Projectiles crash into the wagon ring, smoke thickens inside the camp lanes, wheels splinter, chains snap, and Béla stands inside the tightening space, realizing the truth that will define the rest of the battle. Mohi is no longer about who is brave, it's about who can keep coherence when the world becomes noise. And right now, Subutai is turning noise into a weapon. Inside the wagon lagger at Mohi, the air turns heavy. Smoke, dust, sweat, fear. Everything trapped between wooden walls that were never meant to hold back an empire for long. From the outside, the lagger still looks like a fortress, a ring of wagons chained together, ropes pulled tight, banners hanging limp in the haze. But from the inside, it feels like a crowded hallway with no clear exit. Every shout echoes, every impact rattles the wheels, and the deeper truth begins to show itself. A defensive structure can protect you, but it can also amplify panic when people start thinking about escape. Béla IV rides through the cramped lanes, trying to keep the kingdom in one piece. He's not just giving orders, he's trying to keep people listening, because this is the moment when the Mongols don't need to break the camp with one clean blow. They only need to keep the pressure constant until Hungary breaks itself from within. And the pressure is constant. Outside the ring, Mongol siege engines keep working. Stones and burning bundles land on the wagons and the ground around them, shaking the camp like a storm hitting a wooden house. Chains snap, wheels splinter, small gaps appear, and every gap becomes a rumor, a promise, a temptation. Inside, the arguments begin. Some barons are already bitter toward Béla from old political disputes. Some blame him for inviting the Cumans. Some blame each other for poor scouting, for bad positioning, for arriving late. In a crisis, old grudges don't disappear. They become louder. Béla tries to impose order, but he can feel it slipping. Modern leaders would recognize this immediately. A system under stress reveals its weakest connections. Mohi is no longer just a battlefield, it's a stress test of Hungary's unity. Then the moment comes that Subutai has always counted on, whether he planned it as a deliberate opening or whether the chaos created it naturally, the effect is the same. A gap appears in the Mongol ring outside. It's not wide, it's not safe, but from inside the lager, it looks like a door. And the first men who move toward it are not the ones you would want leading a disciplined retreat. They are the discontented barons and their retainers, men with horses, men with options, men who believe they can outrun the disaster. They surge out. The breakout is messy from the first second. Horses push shoulder to shoulder, banners tilt, spacing collapses. There's no time to form proper ranks. It's flight disguised as maneuver. And beyond that gap, the Mongol riders are waiting. Horse archers pivot as if the movement had been expected all along. They don't need to crash into the fleeing riders. They only need to force them into confusion, slow them, turn their escape into a scatter. The open plain that looks like freedom becomes exposed space where every rider is suddenly alone. Back inside the lager, that escape makes everything worse. The people who leave take more than their own lives with them. They take manpower, they take cohesion, they take the feeling that everyone is still standing together. Now the camp's defenders are fewer, the gaps are wider, and the pressure from outside feels heavier with every minute. Béla's remaining loyal forces gather around the places most likely to fail. Duke Kalman, moves into position despite exhaustion and earlier fighting. Archbishop Ugrin stands with them, armored and steady, more soldier than diplomat now. And the disciplined religious knights form a wedge near one of the breaches, shields angled and bodies tight, prepared for the kind of close, crushing struggle that doesn't look glorious but decides everything. Their role isn't to win the day, it's to buy time. The Mongols concentrate arrows on that wedge, then follow with a decisive push, heavy cavalry driving forward with controlled power, horses bracing and surging in tight formation. The collision is not a cinematic whirl of blades, it's pressure, weight, and momentum, like two walls leaning into each other until one begins to give. Ugrin falls in the crush, the cross standard slipping down into smoke and dust. The religious knights hold as long as discipline can hold against that kind of pressure. Calm faces behind battered shields, feet sliding in mud, replanting, sliding again. One by one, their line thins until the wedge is no longer a wedge, only fragments of courage still standing where the breach is opening wider. Coleman is struck and badly wounded. His retainers pull him back, steady him, keep him upright long enough to get him out. He will escape the field, but the wound will follow him. And in the middle of this collapse, Béla makes the most painful decision a king can make in the middle of a battle. He leaves. Not because he wants to, because he has to. A loyal servant brings him a fresh horse. Béla mounts quickly, weight shifting, the horse bracing under him. Another loyal man clears a narrow lane through smoke and wreckage. Béla's guard closes in tight around him, forming a moving shield. They ride for a gap, any gap, and burst out of the wagon ring into the open heath. Behind them, the laager continues to fail. In front of them, the plain is wide, but it is not empty. Mongol riders are everywhere, shifting, searching, intercepting. Béla leans forward as his horse accelerates. You can see the strain in the animal's stride, the mud pulling at hooves, the rider's body trying to stay balanced under armor and exhaustion. The pursuit forms behind him, not an angry swarm, but a disciplined pressure. A retainer points toward a lower crossing on the Sayo. Béla angles left, pushing the horse toward the river. Reeds whip past. The bank is slick. The horse splashes into the water, fighting current and mud, muscles working hard. Béla's cloak drags heavy, soaked and dark, pulling at his shoulders. He reaches the far bank and disappears into sparse woodland. There, as daylight fades, the King of Hungary becomes a shadow among roots and mist, guarded by almost no one. The battle noise is distant now, replaced by the sound of his own breathing and the whisper of wind through branches. From the woods, he can still see smoke rising over the plain. Mohi is over. His army is broken. His closest allies have been fallen or carried away wounded. And yet, Béla is alive, because the story is no longer about winning a single day. It's about whether Hungary can have a future at all. And far away, in the settling dusk, Subutai looks toward the western horizon, already thinking beyond the battlefield, because for him, Mohi was never the end of something.
Night closes over the forests near the Sajo, and Hungary's king becomes something few kings ever imagined becoming, a man hiding in the dirt, listening for hoofbeats. Béla IV isn't running for his own life in the simple way a hunted man runs. He's running because if he falls, Hungary doesn't just lose a battle, it loses the one thread that can still tie the kingdom together after disaster. In that moment, his survival isn't personal, it's political, it's national. In the cold darkness, Béla and a single loyal retainer crouch among roots and wet leaves. The battlefield is far behind now, but its glow still stains the horizon with faint orange smoke. Every sound feels amplified, the river, the wind, distant movement that might be nothing or might be death. When dawn finally comes, it doesn't bring relief, it brings visibility. Béla rises carefully, stiff from armor and exhaustion, and starts moving west through narrow forest paths. The retainer leads. They avoid open ground. They step around muddy pools and broken branches, keeping their pace steady and quiet. This isn't a cinematic sprint, it's the grim discipline of escape. Conserve energy, stay unseen, keep moving. At the edge of the forest, they find the first signs of what Mohi has done. Roads filled with refugees, families dragging carts, livestock driven forward by people who don't know where safety is, only that it isn't behind them. Some towns are already closing their gates, others are already burning. Béla rides past them like a ghost. He sees faces, fearful, exhausted, hollow, and he understands something that modern crisis managers would recognize immediately. After a system collapses, panic becomes a force of nature. You can't command it away. You can only rebuild conditions that slowly replace it with trust. In a small village, peasants hesitate before offering help. A water skin, directions, a look that says, "We don't know if you can protect us anymore."
Béla doesn't blame them. In truth, their fear is rational. His army is gone. His banner no longer means certainty. And still, he keeps moving, because the king who stops is the king who disappears. Behind the scenes, the Mongol campaign continues without him. Subutai doesn't chase Béla out of rage. He thinks like a strategist closing a campaign. Béla matters, yes, but infrastructure matters too. Roads, supplies, towns, crossings, and the points where a kingdom gathers itself. Subutai's aim is not just to win, it is to make Hungary unable to function as a coherent state. And in that difference lies the terror of the Mongols. They don't only defeat armies, they dismantle the mechanisms that allow armies to be rebuilt. Béla knows he can't run forever. He needs allies, shelter, and time. That forces him towards the west, towards Austria, where Duke Frederick II rules. Béla hopes for support, or at least refuge. What he finds is a harsher lesson of medieval politics. Even in catastrophe, men calculate. In the Austrian castle, Béla stands in a stone hall beneath cold banners and flickering candles. Béla listens, but not like a brother in arms, more like a man weighing a bargain. Béla leaves with the feeling that Hungary is, for now, alone. Whatever help comes will come slowly and never for free. So Béla turns south, towards Croatia and the coast. The journey becomes harder. Rocky routes, narrow passes, cold rain. In those mountains, escape feels less like a ride and more like survival by inches. Horses pick their way along the edges, cloaks grow heavy with water. The world narrows to the next turn, the next ridge, the next night without being caught. Eventually, stone walls rise against the sky, fortresses like Klis, then the coastal strongholds of Dalmatia. Here, for the first time since Mohi, Béla can breathe. Not because he is safe forever, but because stone gives him something the open plain never could: time. From the battlements, he looks out over the Adriatic. The sea wind hits him hard, cold and salty. Below, waves break against rock as if they're trying to erase the shore. Béla watches the horizon and feels the strange sensation of exile. He is still king, yet he is far from his kingdom's heart. In old Hungarian stories, the Turul appears at turning points, a great bird that signals destiny. Béla sees a falcon glide over the coastline, natural, real, unmagical, and still the symbol lands in his mind, not as prophecy, but as a reminder. Hungary has crossed storms before. And this is where Béla's transformation begins. Because in the quiet moments behind stone walls, a new thought sharpens in his mind. Not, how do I take revenge? Not, how do I return to the past? But something more modern, more forward-looking. How do I rebuild so this can never happen again? He studies maps, he traces routes, he marks the places where stone fortresses should rise. He begins to understand that the old defenses, wooden walls, open towns, scattered authority, are not enough against an enemy like Subutai. Hungary needs a different skeleton: castles, fortified towns, deeper layers of defense, and a system that can survive even when one army is destroyed. While Béla is thinking this way, Subutai continues to move, efficient, controlled, relentless. Yet even for the Mongols, the campaign is not effortless forever. The farther west they go, the more stone rises in their path, the more terrain fights them, the more resistance appears in small, persistent ways. Béla can't stop the disaster in 1241, but he can decide what comes after. In a small stone chamber by the sea, with candlelight trembling over parchment, Béla seals
to protect your place in the next chapter of Mongol politics. Some sources suggest Batu may not have received the news immediately. Others argue he must have known, or at least sensed the strategic consequences. Either way, the death of Ogedai changes the calculation. Even the greatest victories can become dangerous if they pull you too far away at the moment the empire's power is being renegotiated. But politics isn't the only force pulling the Mongols back. By this stage of the campaign, Hungary is no longer a land of easy, endless supply. Much of the countryside has already been stripped. Villages are empty. Livestock has been taken or driven away. Food stores are reduced. What once fueled rapid movement now begins to run thin. At the same time, winter gives way to spring. Ice breaks, rivers swell, marshes return, roads that were solid become mud. The Danube, which froze into a convenient highway, becomes a dangerous barrier again. The weather and terrain that once assisted the campaign now begin to slow it. This matters because the Mongols are at their best when they can move fast and strike hard, constantly shifting to stay ahead of resistance and supply problems. When they are forced into slower, heavier operations, especially prolonged sieges, the cost rises sharply. Stone castles in western Hungary become a real obstacle. The Mongols can take some fortified places, yes, but not quickly enough to convert battlefield dominance into stable control. In many cases, they bypass castles and focus on raiding surrounding land, because stopping to reduce every strongpoint is the kind of war that drains time and resources. And every week spent grinding at walls is a week of growing supply problems, growing resistance, and growing vulnerability to internal political shifts back home. Local resistance adds another layer of pressure. Even small ambushes and raids on patrols matter when an army is stretched and supplies are uncertain. It forces more caution, more guards, more men tied up in protection instead of attack. It doesn't defeat the Mongols outright, but it increases the cost of staying. So by early spring, the European campaign no longer looks like a clean expansion. It starts to look like a difficult occupation with rising friction, at the exact moment the Mongol Empire itself is entering a dangerous political transition. And then, almost as suddenly as they arrived, the Mongols withdraw. For Hungary, this is not relief in the simple sense. It is survival, barely. When Béla returns, he rides into a country that feels like it has been hollowed out. Fields are unplanted, villages are burned, roads are empty. People have vanished into forests, into marshes, into whatever refuge they could find. The kingdom is not just defeated, it is traumatized. Béla could have tried to rebuild the old Hungary, wooden defenses, scattered authority, open towns, and hoped the disaster would never repeat. Instead, he does something far more consequential. He changes the structure of the kingdom itself. He pushes for stone. He promotes the building of castles and fortified towns not as symbols, but as networks, points of refuge that can slow invaders, break their momentum, and give the population somewhere to run that isn't just the wilderness. In modern terms, Béla builds resilience into the landscape. He also focuses on repopulation and economic recovery. Towns need people, fields need hands, trade needs stability. Béla encourages settlement, grants privileges, and invites new communities to rebuild damaged regions. This is not glamorous work, it's administrative, it's long-term, and it's exactly what turns survival into revival. At the same time, Béla adjusts his relationship with the nobles. Before the invasion, his efforts to reclaim royal power had created fierce resistance. After the invasion, he cannot rebuild without cooperation, so he reshapes the balance, still strengthening the crown, but also creating incentives for nobles and towns to invest in defense. It's a hard political lesson learned at a brutal price. Unity cannot be demanded, it has to be built. In later generations, people will call Béla the second founder of Hungary, not because he won at Mohi, he didn't, but because he refused to let Mohi be the final chapter. And what of Subutai? If Béla represents rebuilding after catastrophe, Subutai represents the peak of campaign warfare as a system, coordination across vast distances, rapid movement, psychological pressure, and the ability to close a battle before the enemy understands what is happening. Yet, even Subutai's campaign in Europe shows a truth that no strategist escapes forever. moving fast is not the same as holding ground. Victory on the field does not automatically become stable control, especially when stone fortresses, difficult terrain, supply strain, and political